Hello and welcome to today's episode of Rich, Simple, Human. You know by now that I am Lindsey Frances, leadership psychologist, wealth advisor, and all things behaviour change expert. And today I'm sitting down with the highly esteemed author and so much more, Seung Paik. Hello and welcome to the show. And we're doing this across quite a large time zone. And I'm very happy to have your book in my hands right now. Leadernomics. I hope you can see this. If you're watching on YouTube, you will see the book in my hand. If you are listening on the podcast, you're going to need to go on Amazon and order yourself a copy straight away. If you have got money in the bank, make money, get paid, manage money, or have any interest in money, I suggest you read this book immediately, Leadernomics. You are going to learn so much, and it's going to point you in directions you didn't even know were possible. That was a big intro. I'm going to do a quick intro for you as well, because I've been practicing it for weeks. You have spent 25 years in military leadership and over 2 decades teaching economics at the University of Colorado and the United States Air Force Academy before coming to write this rather wonderful book. And here it is. Welcome to the show. I'm delighted to have you here because we've been having so many conversations and finally we get to record. It's nice to see you.
Lindsey, it's great to be here. I cannot tell you, it always warms my heart when a book that I've written and a message that I have is crossing the ocean and finding people like yourself. And so thank you for highlighting the book. Thank you for showing it to the world and just you yourself and just this platform that you have. I think it's just fabulous. I feel like it's a moment that you give to your audience and to whoever will tune in. It's a moment of pause, which is such an important thing for people who are doing well in life and who are racing ahead. Just to have this opportunity to sit with Lindsey and to get a moment of pause and reflection. It's so rich. And so thank you for having me as a guest. I am super excited to be here. And, I just love talking with you.
It's great to be here. And of course, the first time we were talking, actually, you were in Paris and now you're back in the States. So we've both been whizzing around the world, which is, of course, a great privilege, but also creates another level of stress and anxiety on the physical, mental and emotional body. So anybody who is in one of those roles where they're clocking up their air miles on repeat, you need to listen to this conversation as well. And as Seung just said, take a breath. Take a pause and listen in to what we've got to say for the next 30 minutes or so. We are going to start by talking about consciousness. And what's interesting about that is people are now thinking, how are these two going to segue between consciousness and economics? I don't see the link. Well, stay listening because we've got a lot to say on the subject. Seung, to use your own words, you have said that economics is a mirror to our consciousness and it is a truth discipline. Please begin to tell us what you mean and what your experience has been with such a beautifully rich and deep statement.
Yeah, thank you for asking. First, the discipline of economics is something that I encountered as a young person. I was 18 and I was navigating what I would consider my first major decision in life, which was should I or should I not enter this institution called the United States Air Force Academy, which would have been a 4-year college plus a 5-year active duty service commitment. So a total of 9 years of my life at the age of 18, making a decision of whether or not I wanted to be a part of this institution called the military. And so for me, being a fish out of water and not having any type of military background, you can imagine it felt like a very immense decision. And yet I didn't really have in that season of life what I would consider mentors. I had parents who loved me. I had friends who cared for me, but I didn't have this mentor that could kind of like subjectively probe my thoughts and motives and priorities and values, and then kind of lead me out to the other side of objective guidance. And lo and behold, I was sitting in my first economics class, and I had this professor who basically introduced economics in a very emotive sort of way. And he started doing this kind of chaotic dance and rhythmic motions with arms and legs and bodies. And I'm like, what is going on here? We're at a military institution. And here is this man in full uniform, and he looks like he's dancing in front of the class. And what he was illustrating to us was that this craze of movement is in fact this thing called life. It's chaotic. It's up and down. It's a roller coaster filled with uncertainties, unknowns, mysteries, left turns and right turns. And how are you going to navigate in this world of confusion? And then he pulls out this thing called calculus. And he says, I know that the prerequisite for this econ class is that you guys have all had calculus. So because you've had calculus, what is the purpose of first derivatives? And us being a STEM, science, math type of institution, we all had an answer. And we said, well, professor, the first derivative calculus is all about finding a point on a curve and then getting the slope. And he said, exactly. He said, that's also the purpose of economics. And I sat back and I thought, what does he mean? And he broke it down and he said, just as I was doing that dance, and just as you told me that it's finding a point on a curve, well, that curve is life. That curve is the chaotic confusion roller coaster that you're going to be experiencing. And the way you're going to navigate through that is you're going to distill it down to a moment, and you are going to find the slope. You're going to find the straight path that can help you guide forward onto the next day. That is the purpose of economics. That is the purpose of first derivative calculus. And so in this season of crisis, should I not be in the military? What should I do next in life? I'm only 18. Can I make this huge monumental decision? I need a mentor. And standing before me, I saw the skies part. I saw the seas open. And I thought, maybe this is my mentor. And I wasn't talking about the crazy professor. He was pretty good. But I was talking about this discipline called economics. Can it help me distill the noise, the chaos, and the confusion? Can it help me distill it down to a actionable, movable point and guide me forward? And principle by principle, class by class, that semester unfolded. And sure enough, Lindsey, I found this mentor. And it wasn't in the way of a person. It was in the way of a discipline called economics. And so then fast forward about, about 7, 8 years from there. And I had the privilege of coming back to this same institution in which I was a student. And now I was the professor and I was the econ teacher. And I was in a room filled with joyful, energetic, leadership-bound college students, and 9/11 happens. And overnight, this room filled with laughing, bravado young people turned into a somber, sober group that was facing a chaotic, confusing, complex, daunting future. And in that moment, I just absolutely realized that no textbook was going to penetrate their hearts, let alone their minds. And so I decided at that point that I needed to deliver economics in the only way that I think would speak to them, because they wanted to know, just like I wanted to know back when I was 18 going through that crisis. They wanted to know, do these disciplines called math, science, social sciences, economics, philosophy, do they have something more than just information? Does it provide me something more than just knowledge? Can it reach into my soul? Can it reach into my conscience and give me a sense of vision and purpose beyond just the material? And so I pivoted and I decided that I would teach economics that semester strictly from a memoir storyteller's method and deliver economics 101, but do it in a meaning that would convey the conscience, the heart, and the soul of economics, the human endeavor behind all the principles, so that they would get beyond the corridor of supply and demand, that they would get beyond the layers of equations, stats, data, and math, and that they would get to see the human endeavor and the heart of what economics has always intended to show us. And so it was out of 9/11 that this whole development of Leadernomics came to be born. And the timing couldn't have been any better, because right at time, shortly before and then after, I'll just give you two really quick illustrations of how it blended in so well. One of my students who had been heavily involved with eBay at that time. He was doing a little side gig where he was selling things on eBay. And it led me to realize that this would be a perfect illustration for them of how we bring about the conscience and the soul of economics. And I told them, I said, hey, you know about eBay? A couple of years prior to this class, in the late 90s, there was an auction. It was for a human kidney. And the human kidney went on the eBay market. And I think it initially started at around $25,000. And within a matter of about an hour, that human kidney was being bid up to $6 million. And it illustrated that when you have something that is of high demand and yet rare in supply, there is no limit to where the market may take that price of that human kidney. And yet, before it could continue going higher and higher, eBay intervened and they stopped the auction. Well, why? Why did they stop the auction? What was it about this human kidney going into the public auction that would make a company, a private company like eBay, intervene and stop it? Well, because there was some implications. What are the second and third order effects of allowing human organs to be placed on the public market? Is there something more than just market value and market price that needs to come into consideration with things like human organs? Does it do something to the human in the way of commodification and objectification that we as a society may never want to go down that path? Well, aligned with that, after 9/11, the United States government had developed this fund called the Victim Compensation Fund, the VCF. And it was a means of goodwill where Congress had developed this fund, and it would be a pool of resources that would be given to victims of family members of lost loved ones and also those who had been severely injured in the 9/11 events. But the amount of the fund wasn't unlimited. It was capped. It had an amount that was in the billions, but it wasn't endless. And so how do you determine the amount of compensation to give to each family member and or victim? What is enough? What is not enough? What is tasteful? What is not tasteful? And when they ended up gathering a group of actuary scientists to compute the amount that would be awarded, well, they used the typical things that most insurance companies would use. They used someone's age, their health, their profession, all of their credentials, their education, their current income. They throw it into the database and out pours a number. And if you were a janitor that day who lost your life, you may get a 6-figure check delivered to your door. And the mother, the father, the husband, the wife, the child is going to answer that door. And you're going to say, on behalf of the United States government, we would like to issue you this check for 6 figures on behalf of the loss of your loved one. And the recipient is going to take that check and say, oh, that's about right. Of course not. Of course not. At the same time, the person who they threw all that data into the database because they were quite healthy, quite wealthy, quite educated, and had all the pedigree is going to get a 7 or 8 digit check. They're going to go to the door. The loved one is going to receive that check and they're going to say, that's a good amount. Of course not. Of course not. So it's so clear to my students as they're wrestling with this. Well, Captain Paik, how could our government do this? How could they come up with these numbers of 8 digits and 7 digits and 6 digits and how distasteful it is to take it to the door? Well, that's the market. The market prices life. The market prices the human, not because it necessarily wants to, because it does. It has to. It's the market forces. And when you have a scarce amount of anything, there's no endless check that you can give someone. But at the same time, there's not a single loved one that was a recipient of a check that would look at that amount and say, that's adequate. Because in our hearts, we assess the priceless inherent value of that lost loved one, right? That's our conscience speaking. That's our soul speaking. So on the one hand, Lindsey, we have market value. We have market analysis. We have what is in the marketplace. And then on the other hand, no one would dispute that we have this notion of what should be. What should be? And in economics, The what is called positive economics. The data, the math, the graphs. You put in an item, supply and demand will give you a price. But on the other hand, we have normative economics. What are the second and third order effects? What are the things of inherent worth and priceless value that we need to consider in our decisions, in our policies, right? It's a huge gap. It's an infinite gap. And that's the essence of Leadernomics. Leadernomics is created to bridge that gap. It's that soul, it's that conscience, it's that human endeavor that we all innately know, but we don't know how do you take what is and try to get it to where it should be.
Is an absolutely fantastic scraping the surface, really, of the way that you present this in a way that feels so tangible. And for anybody listening, A, you must now read the book, but B, this is a transformative way of looking at economics, consciousness, and life in a way that makes so much sense. You will have just listened to that last few minutes and I think agreed with everything that you've just said. Out in the marketplace, we're going to talk about the book tour in a minute. Seung, how many people have already started this type of conversation through this lens, or what has inspired you to take this to market now and share this message with people?
So that's a big part of why I think it's always been a burden for me to speak about it for 20 plus years. And then finally, I'm long overdue, but finally to write the book is because a lot of people may not have had a formal economics course to begin with. And then those who have, when they open the textbook, they get a lot of the positive. They get a lot of the what is. They get the supply and demand, the pricing, the equations, the math, and the data. And their heart never goes beyond the corridor to see the true soul and conscience of economics. And so at a very humorous level, I wrote the book because I never wanted another economics student to ever fall asleep in class. And when they fall asleep, they're falling asleep because they just didn't get through the corridor. But in a more serious way, I wanted people to see economics the way I saw it. I wanted them to see that this framework, it's an unfolding that penetrates subjectively their thoughts and their preferences and their motives, and that it can be a source of mentorship to guide them forward. And once you recognize this about economics, I don't know how you can possibly fall asleep, because it's your 24/7, 365 conscience that's given to you in a framework to help guide you forward. So, when I think about the human endeavor of economics, that's what I want everyone to get on day one. But to answer your question, I don't know how many people are getting it in that way. I don't know if they're making that connection on day one, let alone day 100. If they don't, they leave economics thinking, oh, well, economics is about GDP. Well, it's not just about GDP. Economics is about, should I buy that product or should I not buy that product? No, it's about so much more than producers and consumers. It's so much more than just the labor and capital. It's honestly about human endeavor, human relationships, interacting in the marketplace to achieve something that's maximal and optimal. And how do you get there? Well, you got to get them beyond the corridor of the positive into the normative. So that's really the heart of why I invested in writing this book.
And I know that we've got quite a lot of educational professionals that listen to this show. And I think my urge would be now to, for a very small price, buy the book, read it yourself and hand it on, especially to that hungry generation that's coming up. Every child I speak to in that sort of 18 to 20 bracket wants to study econ. They're applying to, the big universities. They want to be at Stanford, Yale, LSE, wherever, studying econ. If they read this book first, it will unfold their experience, their life experience, in a way, like you just said, they can never unsee. But education doesn't move as quickly as people like you and I can move. So here we are moving in this space of consciousness, urging people to think about economics in the context of human endeavor and consciousness to really unlock the power of our human capacity. I could go on about this forever. The fact that we've just talked about the value of a kidney, the value of a human life, and my job is to help my clients understand the value of their own lives now and the way that they're living, the purpose they're living for, and the legacy they want to leave behind, in the hopes that they make really good decisions and become much more servant-hearted. than just trying to put money in the bank and avoid tax. And you know that because I say it to you. I've said it to you a lot, that this is not really what life is all about. I don't want to digress and I want to ask you more questions, but I wonder if you might share some of your very recent experiences on the book tour, because I've loved seeing pictures of you all over the USA from different bookstores with your book, looking very cheerful. Tell me about the tour and tell me about some of the people that you met, because I know there's some stories there as well.
The book tour's been fabulous. It's funny because my book launched back in September and I had quite a few book events and bookstore engagements. And shortly before the launch of my book, I broke my leg. And so these types of engagements take generally several months to schedule. And so when I broke my leg, all of the in-person events I had to cancel. They got completely wiped away. And so when I was finally back up and running again, able to go on my book tour, which was about 3 to 4 months after it had launched, I had to start from scratch. And yet I didn't have the time to coordinate all of these book events for another 4 to 6 months. I wanted to hit the road and get the book out there. And yet most of these bookstores, and in particular, the independent, smaller bookstores, the local bookstores, they carry about 70, most of them carry about 70% of their books are fiction. Maybe another 15 to 20% are children's. And you'd be surprised at how small they curate nonfiction books. And so with a very small curation of nonfiction books, the first set of books that they're going to have in their store are New York Times bestsellers, USA Today bestsellers. They're not going to try to pick up some type of an unknown independent author as one of their books in an independent bookstore. And so as I'm calling these bookstores, they're basically saying, who are you? Who's your publisher? And why would we like to invite you to do a book event or a book reading or a signing? And they were absolutely right. They don't know me from Adam. And they have a very curated small community of readers. And so I had a little bit of an epiphany. Excuse me. And it was this. How many bookstores are the supporting actor for the author? And when has the author gone to these bookstores, flipped the tables and said, hey, listen, I'm the supporting actor. You guys are the amazing protagonist for us. Without you, without the independent bookstores all over the world, we don't have a marketplace to bridge to local communities and local readers. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to change this book tour and it's going to be about the bookstore. And so I called it #bookstory. And I curated a list of independent bookstores that I thought had a fascinating history, story, and a connection to their community. And I said, I would love to come to your bookstore. My name is Seung Paik. I'm the writer of Leadernomics. And my book is all about understanding this shift from market value to priceless inherent value. And I can't think of a better local institution where you guys provide a value far beyond the market into your community that has a priceless worth than the local bookstore. Would you please allow me to come and give an interview so that I can capture your story and highlight it to the world? Next thing I knew, I had these independent bookstores saying, when can you come? And so it opened the door. And so I just got done with about a 15-day 20-city, 19 different bookstores that I hand curated that I thought had special stories. And the stories were amazing, Lindsey. They were amazing, these independent bookstores. Number one, some of them are doing quite well because they do far more than just books. They actually do a lot of events. Some of them do weddings, and they're quite posh in the way that they're created and the way they're designed. But for the vast majority of these bookstores, they're not in it for the money. They're not going to make a lot of money selling new and used books. But some of them have been around for over 50 years. The oldest bookstore that I went to was one in a small town of Montecito, California. And that bookstore just celebrated its 101st birthday. And so you ask yourself, how does a bookstore like that, a brick and mortar, local, small mom and pop bookstore, how does it survive in today's day and age of big box stores and online consumerism? How does it survive for over 100 years? Well, it's because it's absolutely, inherently, pricelessly embedded in the community. It's a part of their lifeblood. And that community supports that bookstore in a way that it's as if it's a part of the family. And you get that sense not only from the bookseller, but you get that from the consumers and the customers, and the relationship is amazing. And so that's the kind of sentiment I was seeing from bookstore to bookstore to bookstore. There was this one bookstore in the northern part of LA, just north of LAX airport. It's called the Book Jewel. And this woman who did quite well in her business world, it was always her dream to go back to her home community and to open a bookstore because they had no longer had a physical bookstore in her community. And so she took about 5 years and all of her savings and built this bookstore. And 2 or 3 years after it opened, the day before April 25th, which is National Independent Bookstore Day, which is actually their biggest, highest revenue book sale day, they were fully prepared. They were energized. They were ready to open that day. And a drunk driver plowed into the front of their bookstore, destroyed everything in the path of its entrance. And that night, about 2 a.m, the bookseller was brought to the store and just couldn't believe, what will they do? We have this big independent bookstore day in the next day and a half, and my bookstore has been destroyed. Shortly after the police concluded the investigation, the entire staff arrived, and then members from the community started coming. And within 36 hours, they cleaned up that bookstore so that it could open on Independent Bookstore Day. And that day was the biggest grossing revenue day they had other than their grand opening. It just kind of goes to show that these bookstores are far more than a transactional bookstore. They are a relational melting pot for the community to gather, and they've been embraced. And that's the essence of Leadernomics, right? Leadernomics is trying to convey to the people that if you keep your eyes solely on that which is market value will be what you will always get. But you have to recognize that there is this essence that we innately know, that there is something of inherent worth and priceless value that surrounds us every day, both in the way of people, in the way of ideals, in the way of even institutions like a bookstore, right? And when we understand that and we act upon it, we take the market from what is to what should be. We see things like communities rallying around and taking a bookstore that's just been destroyed and in 36 hours getting it back up on its feet, right? That's not the market, what is acting. That is the inherent, what should be acting, and taking the market to another level, right? That's human endeavor economics. That's how economics is intended and was designed to work.
There's so much in this for about 27 podcasts. Inherent value, knowing your own value, and also priceless inheritance are things I talk about a lot with people. This market value is an anomaly. Rather than go into, I'm struggling to know where to go next in terms of time, Seung, but when we think about it in this way, it changes the way we view everything. Our own value, our own work, our own self-worth, we could talk about longevity, we can talk about how we spend our time. You've been on tour. This is the heart of the work that you do. And I want to ask you, for people that are now thinking, yes, I agree with everything you're saying, what could I do next? Can I ask you, what leadership failure would you point listeners towards avoiding? Or what applicable tip could you give them to stepping into this philosophy of economics more fully, because it's life-changing?
Just foundationally, and this is almost day one of economics, if it's brought properly, ought to be a full-blown discussion on this word called scarcity. Now, scarcity has been given a rough label, right? Because it gives you this context and connotation of limit and constraints, and that's what scarcity means. And I love the word scarcity because to me, it is not the limitation or the constraint. In fact, it is the most abundant guide that you can have. And my message for everyone with regard to the word scarcity, wrestle with scarcity, because scarcity, the more you wrestle with scarcity, it will challenge you to recognize that you're human. You don't have infinite amounts of time. You don't have infinite amounts of capacity. You don't have, even those who are incredibly wealthy, you don't have an infinite amount of resources, right? So the the idea of scarcity isn't to bog you down in the negativity of limitations. It's actually intended positively to drive you toward the notion of, since I am human and since I do have limitations and constraints, what's the most important thing? What's the best use of my time? What's the best use of my resources? Scarcity ought to challenge you toward, what are my values? What are my priorities? What are my absolute non-negotiables in life and in leadership? And then the earlier you've wrestled with that, and I'm not saying that it may not change throughout the course of your life, but at least you're on a path and on a trajectory of wrestling with that question regularly throughout your life. And so what you're doing now is now you're investing not just randomly and arbitrarily across an assortment of things. At least you're mindfully investing your limited resources, time, energy, and emotions into the things hopefully that are most important. And the sooner you wrestle with that in your life, the sooner you can apply the principle in economics known as the time value of money, or what I like to call the time value of anything. The earlier you invest, the greater time, the greater runway you have to experience exponential growth. So for the people, for example, Lindsey, I suppose you work with quite a few entrepreneurs, business people, corporate executives who have done quite well for themselves in their lives, have probably also invested a significant amount of time, energy, resources, and emotions into their success. And yet perhaps they're in a place where they say, my marriage isn't going well, or my relationship with my son or daughter is non-existent. And I would say, well, maybe perhaps that could be because this question of scarcity driving you toward the most important values and priorities, if they weren't really recognized early on, you didn't put in the time value investment into those things that you actually value until perhaps it was far too late. Health is a great example. Health is one of those things where so often we say, I'll work on my fitness, I'll work on my health one day. Well, health has a way of having exponential returns. For the people that have been exercising and have had some type of a fitness routines in their 20s and their 30s, it's amazing how much it pays dividends into their 40s and 50s and 60s and beyond. If you have not been one to ever invest into your fitness and your health in your 20s and 30s, and now you're just beginning in your 50s, it takes a while to experience the exponential growth of investing into your health into your 60s, 70s, and beyond. So the same thing for relationships. If you have a broken relationship with a friend or a child, and you haven't invested into it, and all of a sudden you find yourself at the age of 60 saying, let me try to invest into this relationship, you may either find out that it's a little too late, or you may find out that you don't get to enjoy the exponential growth of a relationship when you started in your 60s, when you could have began in your 20s and your 30s. And so those are two really incredibly foundational principles of economics that I like to impress upon young people who are just beginning their leadership journey, is think heavily about scarcity. It'll drive you to your values and your priorities, and then invest in it early so that you can experience the time value, the exponential growth, so that those areas that you value, you can experience the riches later in life. You may have a lot of monetary wealth, but if that isn't some of the value that you really hope to possess into your 60s and 70s, and it was more in the way of health and relationships, then I hope you thought about that sooner in life. Two very basic ways of looking at economics from a human endeavor.
Two basic messages there, but messages that we don't often hear. So I hear the reverse all the time. I'm too busy making money or saving tax, and I'm going to worry about this later. And the human psyche struggles with this future discounting. I won't worry about my health now, I'll worry about it when I have to. And we know the human body doesn't work that way. We've just touched on scarcity of time, which leads us into conversations about fear of death. I could now yap on about sleep for hours. If you think you can survive on 5 hours sleep, good luck when it comes to cognitive decline post 55. It's not working well for you. We know that. There's thousands of scientific papers out there that says sleep is too important. And of course, what do people say? Well, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Well, you're going to be dead a lot quicker than you would be otherwise. And there are very strong economic principles behind this. So if you think you're an economist or you're in that field, or it says that's on your LinkedIn, I suggest you have a little rethink through the lens of the book Leadernomics, because this is so important. We just touched as well on, as you said, the booksellers didn't know you from Adam, and I could feel my audience suddenly having a little wrestle with their thoughts on Jeff Bezos, but we're going to keep away from that because that's a little political conversation that we should avoid. But you and I are indeed very keen followers of the gospel. And it has been fundamental to the way that we've lived both of our lives and continues to be on a daily basis, as you and I have discussed. Can you explain to me a little bit about the journey into economics with the lens of faith and the gospel truths, please?
Thank you for asking that, Lindsay. So I had mentioned earlier how this discipline called economics was kind of a subjective probe into my heart, almost a mirror challenging me as to why my preferences are what they are and why my motivations are what they are. And the way economics does that in particular, it does it with this, the cost, right? Opportunity cost is basically when you choose to do one thing, there's something else of value that you forego, that you will not do. So right now, you have a significant opportunity cost. You just came back from an overseas travel. You are lacking significant amounts of sleep, and yet you have chosen to join me on this podcast interview, when instead, your opportunity cost is you could be in your bed, snuggled up, getting a tremendous amounts of necessary rest. And so you have foregone that, right? So there is an actual time element and a monetary element for you to be here with me, but there's also an opportunity cost that you have foregone to be here with me. That opportunity cost conveys something to me. And you know what it conveys to me? It conveys to me that right now you value me and this episode and your audience more than you do your sleep. Whether you will say that or not, your decision conveys a value statement. Your opportunity cost decision conveys to me a value statement. And so when I know what you are giving up, it conveys to me, thank you, Lindsay. And you're like, well, for what? And I think, well, thank you because you're giving up some precious sleep time to be with me. This is how economics works. Economics, in its principles, is constantly revealing us like a mirror our values, our priorities. And we see it through our trade-offs and our sacrifices. What are we giving up in lieu of something else? And so fast forward a number of years, and as I am leading a group of people now, and I'm challenged in my leadership as a young and I'm recognizing more and more, instead of my successes as a leader, instead of how I am doing well, economics is constantly revealing to me, man, you're kind of selfish, right? The decisions that you're making, you talk about your people all day long, you talk about the team all day long, but it seems to me that your decisions are revealing your priorities more than their priorities. And let me give you a very simple example, right? If I choose to have a meeting at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, that has a very different opportunity cost for me and others than holding a same meeting on a Friday at 5 p.m. before a 3-day weekend. Let me say that again. A meeting at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday carries a very different opportunity cost for me and others than a 5 p.m. Friday meeting before a 3-day weekend. And I used to be that young leader that decided that I'll hold that meeting when it's most convenient and when it's least costly for my opportunity cost. And if that means Friday at 5 p.m., that's when we're going to have the meeting, right? But that is revealing something to me. That is revealing to me a value that my priority and that my opportunity cost supersedes the opportunity cost of the people that I'm leading. And it was starting to convey, and they could see it. And so these are the kind of ways in which I began to wrestle through the discipline of economics, revealing to me my heart through the decisions and the priorities that I was making. And I didn't like what I saw. And I felt that I wasn't a very good leader, at least one who would say one thing, but was doing things and deciding things that was quite contrary and hypocritical. Well, that kind of led me down a path to discover and to wonder, where can I get this sense of integrity, right? Where what I do aligns with what I say. Where can I get this sense of integrity and live it out with alignment? Well, sure enough, I had this aunt growing up, and she was a Christian woman, a God-fearing woman. And for every birthday, she would send me a Bible. And so by the time I was having this crisis of leadership, I thought maybe the Bible has something to say about integrity. Maybe it has something to say about leadership. And so I pulled open my bottom drawer, and sure enough, Lindsay, I had about 10 different Bibles there. And I pulled out one. And sure enough, I started reading through Matthew chapter 5, the Beatitudes. And the Beatitudes started going through this whole process of, well, you say that you haven't committed murder. You have anger in your heart. You've committed murder in your heart. Well, you say that you haven't committed adultery. But if you have lustful thoughts, you've kind of committed adultery in your thoughts. And as I started peeling back the layers, this book started revealing to me like a mirror. Yeah, just like economics. Yeah, your priorities are screwed up. And as a matter of fact, your thought life is screwed up. As a matter of fact, your intentions and your motives are kind of screwed up too. And you're not as selfless as you say you are or that you think you are. In fact, this whole notion of integrity, you're right, Seung. You don't have it. And I was like, oh no, it's only confirming what I feared. I feared that I didn't have it. And now this book is saying, you're right, you really don't have it. And then I thought, how do I get it? How do I get it? I don't have it. How do I get it? Can I buy it? Can I go get integrity somewhere? Is it just modeling people who have integrity? And then my definition of integrity changed. For 4 years at a military leadership institution, we were taught that integrity is doing the right thing when no one is looking. And I thought to myself, who does the right thing when no one's looking? Who thinks the right things when no one's looking? Not me. And it changed to this notion of doing the right thing because someone is always looking. And that someone began to be revealed in the Bible to me as this person by the name of Jesus, by this person who's known as God. Do the right thing because God is always looking. And you know why you can make progress in that area? Not because you have integrity, but because there's this person that you believe in who possesses perfect integrity. And as I started reading the Bible, it became very clear to me, like a mirror, like economics, as it was probing my subjective conscience and soul, it kept revealing to me, you are imperfect. You are human. But there is this person in the name of Christ who was perfect. And when you believe in him, his perfection, his righteousness, his goodness, his integrity is given to you, and you give to him all of your non-integrity, all of your sins. And I was like, that sounds like a pretty priceless exchange. That sounds like a pretty amazing transaction. I'm willing to accept that. And so Christ is my integrity, and he's taken all of my non-integrity. And it's from there that I discovered what true integrity is. And so just like economics as a prelude and being a mirror to my subjective thoughts and priorities, the Bible really became that mirror into my heart and into my soul and into my conscience and into my life of character and integrity, and really revealing to me that there is one who does possess it all. And that's the person I want to follow.
That's absolutely beautifully put. And there's now a million questions that I want to ask in your clever mind about the principles in the Bible, of course, around opportunity cost, future discounting, and time value investment. But we don't have time to do that today. But I think that would be a subject for another podcast that would be truly fascinating. It's been an incredible conversation today, and I hope we've given everybody something to think about. You and I are generous with our time, and I know you're very generous in connecting with other people. If people now have a burning desire to follow you, talk to you and ask you questions, where can they best find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very engaged on LinkedIn. And so please do connect with me there. I also have my own website. It's called leadernomics.org, not com, leadernomics.org. And then obviously just my email, leadernomics@gmail.com, leadernomics@gmail.com. I don't use bots. I don't use AI when I'm engaging with individuals in conversation. I like to truly be the real me. And you know, Lindsay, I must say, I get long-winded sometimes with some of these wonderful, deep questions, because I think I think sometimes I just get really passionate about what I truly love and what I truly believe in. And so for things like leadership, economics, faith, I can go on and on. And so thank you for giving me the opportunity to be long-winded and to share my heart with your audience. I really appreciate that.
I appreciate you too. And it's been an absolute pleasure to spend time with you as a brother in Christ rather than catching up on sleep. The good news is I'm so well trained because I value myself because Jesus died for me enough to have caught up on my sleep and have a plan to be able to do that before
Amen.
tomorrow. Amen. That was amazing. I'm so pleased we got to have a conversation, and this won't be the last. So until next time, thank you for joining the show. Thank you to the audience. Please head over to lindseyfrances.co.uk for the newsletter or richsimplehuman.com. Also now to be published on Substack. So that's also very exciting. And until next time, thank you and good night from me.